episode 56 of the Real World Paleo Podcast. Hi everyone, I'm Christine Lehman, a nutritional therapy practitioner and reverse diabetes coach, which is also the name of my website. I help clients reverse diabetes naturally, lose weight, and lower their cholesterol. I also see clients by Skype. Real World Paleo Podcast is now available on iHeartRadio as well as iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play. You can buy some great paleo and primal products from organic skincare to grass-fed meat on my podcast page at reversediabetescoach.com. Please remember while you're listening to the show, advice and information we provide is intended to be helpful and informative, but is not a substitute for medical advice or treatment. I am really excited to have Dr. Akil Palanisamy on the podcast today. I want to introduce him to our listeners. Dr. Akil is a Harvard-trained physician who practices integrative medicine, incorporating the best of conventional medicine and alternative therapies. Dr. Akil, a holistic doctor, completed his pre-medical training in biochemistry at Harvard University, received his medical degree from the University of California, San Francisco, and completed his residency in family medicine at Stanford University. He also completed a fellowship in integrative medicine with Dr. Andrew Weil at the University of Arizona and is certified by the Center for Mind-Body Medicine at Georgetown University, which is in my neck of the woods. Dr. Akil practices at the Institute for Health and Healing in San Francisco, one of the oldest centers for integrative medicine in the United States. He has worked with thousands of patients to help them heal and recover from chronic diseases using dietary changes and nutritional supplements. He blends his Western medical training with holistic approaches, including functional medicine and Ayurveda, the traditional medicine of India. His new book, The Paleovedic Diet, integrates the best of conventional and holistic medicine. Dr. Akil seamlessly blends the paleo diet with Ayurveda and the latest research in nutrition and medicine to present a customized roadmap to perfect health. And we're going to be talking about his book today. So welcome, Dr. Akil.
Oh, thanks for having me on, Christine.
Oh, it's so wonderful. And I always like to ask guests to share their story of how they became interested in nutrition and the paleo lifestyle.
Oh, sure, absolutely. Yeah, for me it was really a personal experience in terms of struggling with my own health issues, which primarily was during medical school when I was in my medical training, and I had changed my diet and became a vegetarian for a few years, and was as part of my yoga practice, and thought I was doing the best thing for myself nutritionally, and then several years later, started having all these chronic health issues, including chronic pain condition and repetitive strain injury, a lot of weight loss, fatigue, and to the point where I had to actually stop my medical training and take a year off because I couldn't, function or sit in class or write or use a computer. And it was during that year that I did a lot of research on nutrition. I saw an Ayurvedic practitioner who actually, the first thing she recommended for me was bone broth. And this was, an interesting thing. About 20 years ago, nobody had heard of bone broth, and I had to make it myself. And but the emphasis was on gut health, and that was really the first thing that had helped me turn things around with my own health, in a few years of all different things I had tried, medications, acupuncture, other modalities. And so I understood the importance of, gut health. And then realizing that for my body type in Ayurveda, actually being vegetarian was not the best option. And so I came to learn that incorporating some more protein, and especially animal protein in my diet, was very beneficial. And that was one of the first steps in my road to recovery. And so I really learned firsthand the power of nutrition and, working on gut health. And then that led me to further study Ayurveda and then functional medicine, and then bring that together with, the paleo world.
Mm-hmm. So I wanted just to define or talk about how you define the paleo diet, because I noticed, and thank you for sending me the book, that you don't necessarily seem to be advocating for no dairy or grains, which, the strict paleo people would say, wow, that's not part of the caveman diet.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I think that the benefit of paleo is, I think, more as a template, and focus on the quality of food rather than automatically restricting all categories of food for everybody. So in that case, I definitely recommend, of course, avoiding gluten, for everybody in general, and avoiding processed food and vegetable seed oils, trans fats, so all the things that people always eliminate when they eat paleo, and that's, I think, a tremendous strength of the diet. But I think in Ayurveda, there's a general belief that the diet should always be customized, and there's a lot of guidance about how to do that. So that's where I think some people can tolerate legumes, which could be really nutritious if properly prepared and and soaked and cooked correctly. And the same with certain gluten-free grains. I think like rice or quinoa, they can work for certain people. So that's where I think some people on an individual basis can benefit from those foods and don't need to be as restrictive as the paleo, just meat and vegetables diet that people hear about.
Mm-hmm. And even I know, and I agree with you, that the food quality is so important. So, part of it is our food supplies in this country, which has gotten way off track. So, there's a big difference even from, getting a whole fat milk from a farmer who's raised his cows humanely than buying it, with hormones and antibiotics.
Right. No, I think that's definitely true, and it is a big issue. And Ayurveda is one of the first systems to emphasize eating local and eating seasonally. So I very much believe in supporting local farmers, shopping at the farmers markets, and Ayurveda believes that the food that's available locally and seasonally actually is specifically beneficial. That's why it's grown there and available there, and so there's a lot of benefits to eating for the local location and season and climate.
Right. So one of the issues I know you struggled with, and I've thought about, I'm actually practicing Tibetan Buddhism.
Uh-huh.
And I know in Hinduism and certain Eastern religions, animal meat is really kind of taboo.
Right.
Interestingly, there are a few Buddhist doctors who will make exceptions if they think you're really nutritionally deficient in iron, for example. But but in general, that's something I personally have wrestled with. But as a nutritionist, I kind of came out with what I think of as a compromise, which I only source my meat from a farmer, a Mennonite farmer, whom, I've interviewed and vetted, so to speak, and he, treats his animals, first of all, the grass-fed pasture, which is important.
Yes.
And then, as far as, frankly, killing them, he uses a stun gun, and it sounds pretty humane. They don't feel anything, and they're fairly older. And, so I kind of got into the details with him about what he does. And, I just won't buy my meat from a store because I think there's a big difference between factory animals raised on these factory farms.
Yes.
And these kind of individual farmers who really do care, I think, about their animals.
Yes, I think there's a huge difference, of course, in environmental impact, and so I definitely don't recommend conventional meat or poultry or eggs. But there's also a big difference in nutritional content, in terms of better omega-3 content, omega-3 and fatty acid profile, nutritional profile. So
exactly.
I think there's a lot of benefits and reasons to have good quality, grass-fed, pasture-raised, animal products, if the person chooses to.
Exactly. So we were talking also about, paleo and ancestral health, which, as we know, encompasses a little more than paleo. It's Weston A. Price and primal and so on. But I thought in your book you incorporated some of what's called the blue zone research, which is a little more current. These are current populations.
Yes.
As well. So I was wondering if you could just tell us what the research found in terms of health and diet.
Yes, this is a very fascinating area. The blue zones are current populations throughout the world that have unusual longevity. So the life expectancy could be 8 or 9 years longer than other populations in the world. And these are all over the world. There's populations in Costa Rica, in Greece, in Okinawa, Japan, and in Loma Linda, California. And the thing that is common to all of their different diets is that they eat really nutrient-dense whole foods, and they don't really have processed foods. And they often, grow their own foods as much as possible. And in addition to diet, they're also, of course, very physically active. And probably one of the biggest factors is the power of community and social connection within these, these zones, because they're incredibly connected populations, and it's in contrast to the isolation that's so common in the West. So there's a lot of different diets that all these populations eat because they're all over the world, and so the key thing is that there's a lot of different healthy diets that are possible that as long as people aren't eating the conventional Western diet with refined grains and vegetable oils and white flour, as long as they're not eating that, there's a lot of different ways to eat nutrient-dense whole foods in a way that promotes longevity. And also the research shows that when these populations come to the West and then adopt a typical Western diet and lifestyle, their rates of heart disease, cancer, diabetes all increase within just a generation, because it's that quick, the changes in diet, how that affects their risk for cancer and Western diseases. So it's pretty clear that the ancestral traditional diet and lifestyle is really protective, but as soon as they move and lose that, the benefits are lost, pretty quickly.
Yes, I thought that was very interesting. I noticed that too with Mexicans and the difference between their traditional diet and the Mexicans. They compared the two populations.
Yes.
And the Mexicans who came to the United States, often California, and what happened to them. And it is very sad, actually, and it's quite a stark contrast. The other thing I noticed was that it seemed like the majority, maybe 3 out of 4 of these groups, were eating more plant-based foods.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's, I believe, part of the paleo diet as well, that always plants should be the foundation of the diet, whether you're eating meat or not. And I think, we all could use a lot more fruits and vegetables and, plant-based phytochemicals. And that's definitely, part of most of these blue zone diets is very heavy on the plant-based foods.
So if you're in Okinawa, for example, which is one of the groups, you might eat more starchy tubers, things like that.
Right, exactly, yeah, and they have a lot of seafood as well, which is very, very healthy out there. And yeah, that's another thing why I wanted to really emphasize in my book that I think paleo should be a plant-based diet, and I don't think they're contradictory, because a lot of people think, plant-based nutrition is the way to go, and that's completely opposite to paleo. But I think it's actually, they do overlap, because I think the ideal, even our ancestors, like for millions of years, they were not able to hunt and kill meat every day. I mean, they had to survive on tubers and berries and roots, whatever they could gather, and then when they were fortunate and were able to kill an animal, they would have meat, but it certainly wasn't the majority of their diet.
Right, and I thought this whole geographic variation was very interesting, and then you seem to suggest that we should look at our own ancestry as well to determine what may work for us or genetically and environmentally. But, as you know, we're a very transient population now.
Yes.
But I thought I would just use myself as an example.
Sure.
I'm Northern European, including half Norwegian, right?
Okay.
So I went back to Norway to kind of reconnect with some relatives recently. And so what I discovered was that, of course, they eat a lot of seafood. They have the fjords, and that works for me. But I also think they probably ate a lot of potatoes, which I tend to go more the paleo route with that, the sweet potatoes. But the thing that I noticed in the stores was, frankly, their fresh greens. Well, they weren't fresh greens.
Yeah.
they're what we call fresh greens were pretty old and kind of wilted and not particularly fresh looking. And I think they have to import some of that.
Oh, that makes sense.
Because the soil is very rocky there, so it kind of lends itself to certain kinds of, maybe the tubers, for example, but not so much, the fresh greens. So I was kind of wondering how far you can go with this notion, and
yes.
And
yeah.
You see what I mean?
No, I think that's a good point because, our diet is constantly changing and evolving as society evolves, and we can't go back to eat exactly what our ancestors ate. And, I think there's definitely going to be modifications and changes. And that's why I think the paleo shouldn't be rigid, where it's you're trying to replicate exactly what your caveman ancestors ate, but rather using the philosophy and the template to then guide you to make a customized plan for yourself, in your current location, your current environment, and use that to guide your eating.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. So let's talk a little bit about Ayurvedic medicine. And can you tell us what it means translated from Sanskrit?
Sure.
It means?
Yeah, so Ayurveda, Ayu means life, and Veda means science. So literally that's the science of life, and it's about a 3,000-year-old system of medicine from India, probably the oldest system of medicine in the world that's still practiced, and it really focuses on the idea of balance, between different forces in the body as responsible for health, and the imbalance as leading to disease. So it's more of a qualitative system.
And so you mentioned 3 different body types. Can you explain what they are and some of the characteristics?
Sure. So these are in Ayurveda, there's 3 doshas, which are the physiological principles or forces within the body, and it's the balance of these 3 doshas that leads to health. And the 3 doshas are Vata, which you can roughly think of as wind, and Pitta, which is equivalent to fire, and Kapha, which is earth. And so each of these doshas has the qualities of that element. So Vata, being like wind, has the qualities of light, cold, and dry, and Pitta, as fire, has the qualities of being hot, sharp, and penetrating, and Kapha, like earth, is more heavy, cool, and damp. And so every person has some amount of each of the 3 doshas. So in my book, I have like a 20-question quiz that people can fill out to get an idea how their doshas are, and so those qualities manifest in things like physical characteristics. For example, a Pitta person, because of fire, would tend to feel warm more of the time, and they tend to sweat easily. They're rarely bothered by the cold. They often, really like cold. And a Vata person, in contrast, is, because of wind, tends to feel cold, a lot, all the time, maybe, and really loves the warm weather. They tend to have dry skin, don't sweat as much. And Vata person often has difficulty gaining weight. They tend to be very lean, no matter, what they're eating. And that's in contrast to a Kapha person with more earth, who has typically much more trouble with losing weight. They tend to gain weight very quickly, but they have other aspects that are favorable for them, like usually very robust digestion and a lot more stamina, and really a hardier system. So there's no judgment. Each of the doshas has its pros and cons, and the idea isn't to change your dosha, like you're not, or to try to get like equal amounts of all 3. The idea is to restore your proportion of doshas to their original combination, which is determined from birth. So if somebody is born with like 50% Vata and 30% Kapha and 20% Pitta, then that is their optimal balance. And typically, it gets out of balance with diet and stress and other things, and so they're trying to restore to that original proportion that they were born with.
But how would a practitioner know what you were born with?
Well, so in an Ayurvedic assessment, they would, of course, go through all of these questions. Typically, it's like a 2-hour interview, but then there's very detailed analysis of the pulse. So using pulse diagnosis, they can actually feel a lot of the doshas and get a sense of what your body type is from birth, and those are felt at different levels of the pulse. It's more subtle, but they can actually tell by looking at the pulse and the tongue and other things about what the doshas were at birth, and then what the current state is, what the imbalance is, and what needs to be treated.
That's so interesting. So as you were saying earlier, you can use the questionnaire and so on to customize your diet. And I was wondering if you could explain how that works in relationship to the 3 macronutrient categories: carbs, fats, and protein.
Oh, yeah, sure. So, of course, these are generalizations, and it may not apply to everybody, but the general rule is that the Vata person, so we can start with protein, Vata person typically has the highest need for protein in the diet, and so they're the ones that they're not recommended to be vegetarian. Kapha has the lowest needs for protein. Often they do great as vegetarians or vegans even, and Pitta is moderate, so somewhere in between. And then when it comes to, let's see, so we'll look at fats. So Kapha person, because they're, they have more earth and more of they tend to be more heavy. They have the lowest need for fats. They can do well with minimal amounts of fat. Actually, intermittent fasting is recommended regularly for Kapha to help with maintaining their metabolism, and they can actually tolerate that really well. And for Vata person, they're recommended to have very grounding foods. So fat is definitely part of that as well, especially ghee, which is the clarified butter, which is the best fat for Vata dosha. It's most grounding and the best for the digestion. And for a Pitta person, again, moderate fat intake, and coconut oil is actually the best fat for Pitta because it's very cooling, and it counteracts the heating qualities of the fire that the Pitta person has. And then the final nutrient, talking about carbohydrates. So with that, there's not a general rule for the doshas. That depends on activity level and how much stress they're under, what their weight is. So there's not a general guideline for carbohydrates, but that needs to be customized with all the other variables.
Yeah, I think this is so fascinating because you're really kind of talking, I guess, about a dominant type of the 3. Because when I looked at the questionnaire myself, I thought, I kind of overlap here a little bit between, I think it was Kapha. I'd have to go back and look. But there were 2 with one being a little bit more dominant than the other.
Yes, that's very common. So usually people do have one primary dosha and then one secondary dosha. And if they're very close, like let's say somebody does the questionnaire and they are almost equal for Pitta and Kapha, like maybe you were. So in that case, it's recommended to actually vary the diet based on the season. So during the winter and fall, when the climate is colder, then you might follow more of the Kapha balancing program, because that would, in the cold climate, that would keep you warmer. And then in the spring and summer, when the temperature is hotter, you might follow the Pitta program, which is designed to keep you cooler and when the weather is warmer outside. So you can tailor it as well depending on the season if there's a lot of overlap between a couple of the doshas.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And then you also get into some physical characteristics as well.
Yes. Yeah, so that's also a big part of it. So so for example, with Vata, they tend to have very irregular digestion, and what's recommended is actually very good routine every day, where they're sticking to a schedule and having a very grounding routine. And then with physical activity, a lot of restorative exercise, yoga, and calming exercise. Nothing that's too high impact, a lot of meditation. And the opposite recommendation is for Kapha, because for them, they need the stimulation. They need the high intensity. They need to actually change up their routine because they tend to get stuck in the same routine every day. So it's kind of the opposite recommendations for physical activity and routine when it comes to Vata and Kapha. And then for Pitta people, because they do tend to be more competitive in terms of having a lot of the fire, and so they're recommended to maybe play team sports, things where they're working with other people rather than competing against them. And then, they tend to be the type that can be overheated the fastest, so drinking plenty of fluids, staying hydrated, that's very important for the Pitta body type.
Mm-hmm. So it's almost like they're recommending the opposite of what your natural inclination is in some aspects.
Yeah, so the thing, dosha in Ayurveda, the literal translation is roughly like defect. So you can think of it as like this is like a tendency that can get out of balance easily. And so if you know that, then you can actually take steps to counteract those qualities, that like, for example, Vata person might love excessive activity and kind of bouncing from one activity to the next, and that might be their nature. But if they just incorporate more of a daily routine, like stay grounded, they can bring out the positive sides of that. And then for a Pitta person who's very driven and competitive, they can, if they use some of these techniques to cool the Pitta and work with others rather than competing as much, they can also stay more balanced and then accomplish a lot and be really productive, but not develop inflammation, which is one of the common Pitta disorders. So it's really about knowing yourself and knowing your tendencies and how to stay in balance. And this is one tool to help with the prevention, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. I was wondering if you could read one of your cases
Sure.
on page 102.
Oh, okay. Let's see here. Okay. The case of excess Vata.
Sure, that's fine.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So, let me find that page. Okay. Jessica was a 38-year-old mother of two who came to see me for chronic constipation, fatigue, and anxiety. She was having small, hard bowel movements every 3 to 4 days and disabling anxiety that made it hard for her to function at work. And I'll add that this was a high-functioning Silicon Valley executive, so she was, very high-achieving. She had switched to a paleo-type diet a year before seeing me and initially felt more energy, but then she did not notice any improvement in symptoms. And her diet was mostly large salads daily for lunch and cold cuts or smoked salmon with vegetables for dinner. Her doctors had told her that drinking more water would help with her bowel movements, so she was drinking large quantities of iced water every day. She didn't know why she wasn't feeling better despite avoiding all grains, eliminating gluten, and following a paleo diet. And after getting her history and examining her, I determined that she had an excess of Vata and a very weak Agni or digestive fire. Her daily salads and cold foods were in fact further increasing her Vata and exacerbating her condition. A common symptom of elevated Vata is anxiety, which was her most bothersome symptom. Her 2 water bottles per day filled with iced water were in fact further depressing her Agni and reducing her capacity to digest food properly. So I had her change her diet to eliminate all the raw foods like salads and cold foods. She began eating cooked vegetables, soups, and warm meat dishes instead of cold cuts. And I told her to drink only warm or room temperature water and avoid ice. I instructed her to incorporate more spices into her cooking, such as turmeric, cumin, coriander, and ginger, to stimulate her digestive fire and boost her metabolism. And lastly, I encourage her to use sesame oil, which in Ayurveda is considered to balance the Vata dosha in her everyday cooking. And within 2 months, she reported that her chronic constipation had resolved, and she was surprised to report that her anxiety had improved dramatically. Her energy, while not yet optimal, had increased to about 70% of normal, and I reassured her that as she continued working on Vata and strengthening her Agni, her energy levels would eventually return to normal.
Yeah, I think that's really a fascinating story. And how common is that?
It's actually very common. Yeah, excess Vata is one of the most common imbalances, and a lot of the things that people hear about, like raw food. A lot of people really get into raw food, and if they have Vata body type or high Vata at the time, that may not be the best thing for them. And in fact, they might do a lot better with cooked foods and warmer foods. So Vata imbalance is actually one of the most common ones.
Yes, and it just again speaks to the point that just a one-size-fits-all paleo diet doesn't work for everyone.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And that's where I think Ayurveda can really help with individualizing the diet and tailoring it exactly for themselves, because that's what was the big challenge for all my patients. Was they knew that they needed to customize the diet, but they didn't have the tools to do so, and I think Ayurveda gives some really good tools.
And speaking of doshas, I think are there 6 different types?
There's let's see. There's 3 doshas, and then there's subtypes. So, for example, if somebody is Vata primary and Pitta second, that would be different from Pitta primary and Vata second, of course. Or they could just be one of the 3, like just Vata, Pitta, or Kapha. And rarely they can be tridoshic, meaning they do have equal amounts of all 3. But most common is to have 1 dominant and 1 secondary dosha.
So how did you learn about this? Did you practice Ayurveda or take some training in it?
Yes, yeah. I actually, after my experience with my own health and seeing the benefits of Ayurveda, I began visiting India to learn Ayurveda, and spent several years traveling in India and studying with different teachers throughout South India, and I did some courses, and then eventually apprenticed with one of the top Ayurvedic doctors in India, and learned from him, and I still get advice from him. His name is Dr. Mahadevan, and he has his own hospital in India, and he treats people from all over the world using Ayurvedic medicine. And in India, Ayurveda is actually very advanced. They have inpatient treatments where people do all kinds of body work and treatments for chronic conditions, and people stay up to 2 months in these hospitals, getting Ayurvedic diet and body work, and it's a very immersive and powerful experience.
So going back to the spiritual component, I think people maybe stereotype a little and think, well, everyone in India is a Hindu, or everyone is only vegetarian.
Yes.
How does this doctor handle that in his clinic?
Well, it's actually quite variable. So it is true that there are many vegetarians, within India. Like millions of people are vegetarian and have been for generations. So I think they've adapted to that. But India also is it has a lot of Muslim, population, and so their diet is not, vegetarian at all. And even within Hinduism, there's quite a lot of variability. Most Hindus don't eat beef, from
right, because the cows are sacred, aren't they?
Yes. But there are many Hindus who are non-vegetarian who have, poultry, fish, and other kinds of animal protein. So, I've noticed he's not dogmatic at all, and he really works with whatever, patient's culture and preferences are, because it is possible to eat a variety of, healthy whole food diets, and as long as you're, not following that paleo template and not having the bad stuff, all the flour and sugar
and processed food.
Processed food. Yeah. So he's not dogmatic at all, and that's one thing I really appreciated.
I also like that you just kind of use a common sense approach, which I think different frameworks, and I assume Ayurveda is similar, but which is the idea of just getting in tune with your body. I
Yes.
think in the West, we're often in our heads so much
Yes.
that we're not in tune with how we feel, let alone how our digestive system works or how we're responding to food and so on. So do you want to address, what should people look for when they're trying to understand that, if they're vegetarian or not, what should they pay attention to?
Oh, sure. Yeah, so I think they can definitely start with looking at their body type and their doshas and see whether, they're following a diet that aligns with their doshas and, with their body type. And I think the ultimate test of any diet is really how you're feeling. So I think, if somebody wants to try a vegetarian diet, I would say that's totally reasonable to try it, for a year or, and then just really observe, how is your digestion, how is your energy, how do you feel after each meal, how's your sleep, and just really tune into the body, try to pay attention to how your body's feeling after you're eating certain food, because I do believe that it will tell you. It may not be obvious or loud. It might be pretty subtle, but I think the body has ways of signaling to us. And I think that the more we tune into those and more we listen, I think the more we'll pick up those signals. So I definitely think that's important because we don't want to make food also too much of an intellectual exercise. I think we should really use our senses and taste and listen to our body in terms of guiding our diet.
Absolutely. There should be a phrase, sort of body intelligence, just like there's emotional intelligence.
Yeah, I like
right?
that. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
So we don't have time to get into all of the book today, but I wanted just to mention that you also have this 21-day Paleovedic Detox.
Yes.
And maybe you can just briefly describe it before we close out.
Oh, sure. Yeah, so in Ayurveda, there's also 7 tissues or dhatus in the body. And so with the 3 doshas and 7 tissues, 21 is a very special number. And 21 days is considered the optimal time for a detox because every tissue level in every dosha is cleansed. And so the detox covers exactly, what to take out during those 21 days and what to eat and tailors it to your, the body types, and then talks a lot about spices, which is a big focus of the book because of their, anti-inflammatory effects and benefits for blood sugar and, antioxidants. And so it talks about how to use a lot of spices during that time for detoxification, and then also how to reintroduce, foods. And I think everybody would probably benefit at least once a year from doing some type of detox. And this is one which is not too, too excessive. Like people can do it when they're working and doesn't involve a lot of heavy herbs or supplements. But I found it to still be, very, very beneficial for my patients.
Yeah, I think I agree with you that it can be very helpful and just kind of a cleanse really for your body.
Right, exactly.
So listeners, you can learn more about Dr. Akil and his book, The Paleovedic Diet, on his website, Dr. Akil. That's all combined. Doctor is spelled out, and then it's AKIL.com. So I want to thank you so much, Dr. Akil, for being on the podcast today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on, Christine.
You're welcome. Listeners, remember that you can get 10% off all Casandrinos extra virgin olive oil products by going to their site and entering the coupon code RWP. Next episode, I will be interviewing a holistic chiropractor who will be talking about how he uses active release techniques, or ART, to alleviate many different types of sports injuries, aches, and pain. So thanks, everyone, and have a great, healthy week.